So the term going all in is a term from poker, card game you might have heard of. And it just means placing one's entire stake as a bet on one hand, everything that you've got on one hand. So it involves a certain degree of risk, right? You're betting everything. And the outcome is not certain, right? We don't know what the other cards may be out there. But in playing cards, there's a certain calculation, there's a certain probabilities of holding a winning hand, there's a certain maybe knowledge about the people that you're playing with, maybe other cards that have already been shown. So there's a certain calculation to see what your chances of winning are. It's still a risk, but it's sort of a calculated risk. There's a mental element to it. Maybe the gestures or giveaways that other people are exhibiting in their motions or flickers of their eyelashes or whatever, that give us more information. Still a risk, but it's sort of a calculated risk. And in the case of playing cards, the worst thing that can happen is you walk away broke. You could lose all your money, that's true, but at least when you walk out the door, you'll still be the person that you thought you were when you walked in. Maybe your opinion of yourself might have been deflated, but you have no likelihood, no doubt that you're still the same person, right? So it's not like our very identity is at stake. Maybe our ego, maybe our self-esteem is, yes. Our money is, sure. But the difference is when we're talking about spiritual awakening is it's a whole different degree of apparent risk. It's not actually a real risk, but it's an apparent risk. And the risk is when we take it far enough down that path, is that it can feel like our entire sense of self is on the line. And again, we don't know what the outcome is. In fact, we know even less than we would sitting at the poker table, because we just can't know, we can't imagine what it would be to be awake if we had not yet had that realization. And the reason that we can't is that everything that we've learned to do, nearly all of us in this lifetime, is to trust our mind, trust our thoughts, trust our beliefs, our opinions, our ideas of right and wrong, good and bad, should and shouldn't. And that whole thought stream, that whole structure, that whole set of memories and anticipations and ideas about our personalities and what we like and what we don't like, and everything that we believe that we are, that's what we wake up from. We wake up from the incorrect belief, just the innocent misunderstanding that what we are is that whole package of ideas and beliefs and memories and hopes and dreams, etc. That's what we wake up from. So when that thought package tries to imagine what it would be like to awaken, it can't. It's just it can't imagine its absence, its own absence. So as we begin to get closer to that point where it becomes very real, questions can come up like, well, how do I know it'll be okay? Right? How do I know If I awaken, I'll want to get out of bed in the morning and go to work. How do I know I'll even feel like taking care of my kids? How do I feel like there'll be any meaning to life at all? Right? Those kind of questions. This is, of course, is the mind thinking about objections to, for us to see anything beyond the limited capacity, the limitations of thought. So the thinking mind can't imagine anything beyond itself because it consists entirely of thought. Right? So thought can't imagine what it would be like to be beyond thought, what that would be. So we can't actually answer those questions. At some point, there needs to be some level of trust to move forward. So I recalled a poem that I read in a book of poetry by Adyashanti that I got on the first retreat that I had with him, and read it a couple of weeks later. And I remember being, profoundly impacted by this poem. It's not long, but it seems appropriate to what we're talking about tonight. So the title of the poem, this is from a book called My Secret is Silence. And the poem is entitled Enlightenment is a Gamble. Time to cash in your chips, put your ideas and beliefs on the table, and see who has the bigger hand, you or the mystery that pervades you. Once you've put everything on the table, once all your currency is gone and your pockets are full of air, all you've got left to gamble with is yourself. Go ahead, climb up on the velvet top of the highest stakes table. Place yourself as the bet. Look God in the eyes. And finally, for once in your life, lose. Poem still brings tears to my eyes. Because that's what it feels like. It feels like we don't know what the outcome is. It's not that it is a self-enhancement. It's actually, if the movement is to come into an alignment with the unity of life, the one reality, to recognize that we're in no way separate or other than that, means the loss of this sense of personal autonomy. Right? You can't have personal autonomy and unity. They just, it's one or the other, right? They don't coexist. And I mean, the reality is unity. So even the sense of separation or otherness, or different from, or not worthy of, all of those things are not real, but they can feel very real. They have that power of belief that we've given them. But that's what we wake up from. We wake up from, it's not that we improve our way out of those beliefs into a state of unity. We realize that those beliefs were actually never true. We never were separate. We never were an inch away from unity. Couldn't be, not possible. That's the recognition, not to be taken on as a theory or a nice philosophy or concept, but just the direct recognition of that is what remains after we see through the misunderstanding of what we take ourselves to be as a separate self, right? So this is unusual because, if we've been on the spiritual path for a while, we may have, gained a certain amount of peace and capacity to sit silently and meditate, and in the state of calmness, we may have had some powerful spiritual realizations. We may have had, experiences that of synchronicity that are quite compelling. So there's a certain amount of evidence that we're on a path that has some real validity. That may all be true, and yet there is still maybe some hesitancy. Like, how do I know? How can I be certain that this awareness is trustworthy? Right? Anybody ever feel that? Like, I've experienced awareness, and it's nice, and I can rest there sometimes. But then I find myself, when I check into what it feels like my real identity is, I'm still back in this familiar, well-conditioned body-mind structure. I remember the awareness, I remember what it felt like, but in this moment, I'm not there. Right? So there can be this sense of coming and going that can be quite puzzling, actually, right? Because we know that awareness, we've tasted it, we know what it feels like, we know the freedom of it, the peace of it, the non-judgmental quality of it. We know that, and yet there's some resistance to being that. Some resistance to actually where our sense of being hesitates about shifting its seat of identity into awareness. It's not actually something that we can do deliberately, but what we can do is to see more and more that the belief in our identity as this conditioned, structure of thoughts and memories and beliefs and opinions, etc., to see that more and more as not fundamentally true. Might be relatively true. We have memories of our past, sure. We have, regrets and ideas and opinions, but to see that they're not actually fundamental, that they're not actually absolutely what we are. They don't define what we are. So we can see the untruth of that, and what's left is what's true. Right? So there's an interesting Zen koan, and the koan is there was a bull, big burly bull, attempting to jump through a window to freedom, and the question is how come that his horns passed through the window, the big horns, the big chest passed through the window, all four legs and hooves passed through the window, and then the little tiny tail got caught. How is that possible? So the meaning of the koan is exactly what we're talking about here. It's like in spirituality, we can have come a long way in terms of our understanding, recognizing awareness, seeing our conditioning pretty clearly, learning to, accept our humanity. We can go a long way down that road, and still not be willing to go all in, right? Still hesitate, still hold something back, and that's what this koan's about. It's not actually about farm animals. It's about this spiritual journey, and this particular point where we get caught. Just as we think we're ready to clear the window, be released out into freedom, we get caught by this little tail, this little residual hesitancy. Like, yeah, I've seen this awareness. I get it, but I don't know if I can wholeheartedly trust it. Can I really give myself to it totally? Meanwhile, all those kinds of questions are happening within awareness. Awareness is fully present for them. But those are the questions that sort of, like the little tail on the bull, keep us from finally clearing that window. Because that recognition that not only can we experience awareness, but that we actually are awareness, that movement, that shift of identity, is where unity is found. That direction, right? If it's the separate me trying to decide whether it can trust the awareness enough to step into it wholeheartedly, then we're looking at awareness as an object, as something outside of ourself, another idea that this structured mindset that we have is trying to evaluate whether it's good for me or not. So there may be at this point there may be two movements happening. One is a deep longing for peace, longing for a sense of liberation from the limitations of who I take myself to be, longing for a sense of belonging in the world, feeling comfortable in the world. There can be that movement. And then there can also be this hesitancy, like, yeah, I like the idea of it. I mean, unity sounds really swell, but I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure it's a good idea. It feels like, when you're placing the bet, how confident am I? In this case, confidence doesn't actually enter into it, because we don't do it as a result of a weighing of odds, because we don't know what the other side looks like. All we can see is what we're giving up, and what we can see we're being asked to give up feels like our very self, and that's what can feel scary, right? It feels like, I might die, right? That's what it can feel like is being asked for. Like my very self is being asked to walk away. Not that at all, actually. It's our idea of what we are that's being challenged. But if that's the entirety of what we take ourselves to be, it can feel like, no, it's me. It's the whole thing, right? And we don't know. It's not that we are given any hints about what the advantages will be. I mean, sure, we've read about them, etc. But at this point, other people's ideas or what other people say doesn't hold much weight, right? Because it just feels too personal. So there was a time in our life when we've actually lived from a state of awakeness. The first year or so of our life after we were born, before we began to learn words and concepts, we did live in a state of grace. Things appeared within our visual field. We heard sounds. We had bodily experiences. We knew different sensations. We giggled, we cried, but we didn't have words for any of it. It was all just experience. It was all just perception happening within awareness, without judgment. Right? Need words for judgment. Without desire about what may happen in the future or regret about what may happen in the past. It was all just happening in the present. Memory requires words. Generally, there can be some somatic memories as well, but the experience of a young child is, to an overwhelming extent, in the present moment of whatever is happening. And you can see that if some child is upset, it's usually, before they get too sophisticated, it's usually fairly easy to distract them with the next thing, right? The next thing to be interested in. So in that first, more or less, a year of life, we were awake little beings. And maybe we still retain a memory of that space as part of what motivates this yearning. Something almost like something vaguely remembered but lost, like a deep childhood sort of visceral memory. You can't quite put your finger on, but you know somehow that something has been lost. That sense of yearning. So yearning is something that comes from. It feels personal. It feels like something I want, something that will be better for me, better for this organism. If I achieve unity, then I'd feel better about myself. It can feel like it's personally motivated, but I'd suggest that it's not, that it comes from a much deeper place. It comes from unity itself, seeking itself through this form that you are. Over and over, again and again. Seeking to know itself ever more clearly through form. Right, so this is the yearning. The hesitancy on the other side of these two polar movements. The hesitancy comes from taking ourselves to be this physical organism. And this is what is prevalent in the West. This sense of what's real. Science tells us this. What's real is the physical world, is the world of form. And what pulled us out of this awake beingness for the first year of our life was the alluring quality of this world of form. There was a lot happening out there, and it was interesting, really interesting. And more interesting, apparently, than the sensation of living from this awakeness. And so we were pulled out of it into the world of form, into the world of ideas, into the world of concepts, words, experiences, hopes, dreams, resumes, that pulled out into that world. Maybe now we have a chance to return there, but return there knowing, having had the experience of the world of form, understanding what that is, the beauty of it and the limitations of it, and being able to come back to that innate sense of awareness that we all had and still have, although we may find it more challenging to access now, until we really see what it is, and then it's the most obvious thing in the world. So one question is, how, why did we get thrown out of this state of bliss to start with? And this is where the story of Adam and Eve is instructive, because that's what happened to them, right? They were existing beautifully, harmoniously, peacefully, and then they were ejected from the Garden of Eden. The culture tells us that it was as a result of being ashamed over their nakedness or some such story. But what's actually said in the Bible is that they were ejected for having eaten the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Right? Eaten the fruit of the tree of knowledge. They became knowledgeable, right? Knowledgeable about what? Everything. Right? So as soon as we begin to have knowledge about how the world works, and then we begin to have opinions and ideas and judgments about what's right and wrong, good and evil, what we should and shouldn't do, how I should and shouldn't be, etc. World of knowledge, right? Ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge and lost their innocence, lost the state of grace, apparently. In favor of what? In favor of something much more alluring, right? The world of form. In the Adam and Eve story, it was the snake, representing knowledge, right? Enticement, to enter the world of form, knowledge, ideas. Now we have smartphones and 24-hour cable news. We don't need snakes anymore. So that sort of pulls us out into that, world of form, where there's this sense of, no, that's what's real. That's what's real. And I'm separate. I'm just this singular organism here, and there's a great big world out there, and I'm separate from that. And so the world, even though we imagine ourselves in the world and separate from it, the world seems to have this power to mold us, right? Sort of, contribute to how our personality is formed, give us feedback about whether we're acting in accordance with cultural norms or not, telling us whether we deserve to be here or not, convincing us that we were sinful from the get-go, those kind of imprints. So from that perspective, with our fascination from the world, and then the world's ability to, imprint its judgments about us back onto ourselves, it can be confusing, right? This what we take ourselves to be, if it is limited to this world of form, it is hard to untangle all of that. Right? Hard to see our way through that entanglement, our place in the world, our judgment of ourselves. So it's from that perspective that the hesitancy happens, because that package that we've, in all innocence, taken on. We didn't do it consciously. We didn't decide, well, I'll just, put that awareness aside. That's not really all that important. I'm just going for content. We didn't do that. It happened, without our conscious decision. It was just so alluring, so fascinating. Um, not really our fault, right? Not our fault. The world's so fascinating, and so we get pulled into it, and then we take it to be what we are. We're so convinced that the world of form is what's fundamental that we believe that we also, what we fundamentally are, is form. This body, this mind, my thoughts, that's what's real, right? And so when we come to the point in spirituality where that entire structure is brought into question, it can feel like our very life is being threatened, if that's what we take ourselves to be, right? So the the good news is that we don't have to, um, kill our ego, or that's nonsense. We just have to see that it was never true, and we can do this by, well, there's a number of things that we can do, but the one thing that we can't do is to do it by sheer willpower, right? We can't just tough our way to unity. I'll just block out every other concept except, there's only God. Unity is all one reality, and that'll solve it, right? But if there are, doubts and fears and questions and arguments, and those, if we try to just suppress them, have a tendency to linger and fester, and they never, the idea is not to ignore something that we believe might be true, right? I mean, that's the only thing that gives any of those things reality, is just our belief in them. Just a random thought doesn't have any power. But if we actually believe in, yeah, no, I know this is, I know it, this is me. This is, this is my brain. This is who I am. This is, I'm the sum total of all my experiences. That belief, that certainty, holds that structure in place. But we can't get there by just saying, well, I'll just believe the opposite. I'll just believe that I'm awareness and that'll take care of the problem. No, then we're just adopting another philosophy and trying to hope that those fears and doubts and hesitancies won't show their face very often. But they will. They'll come back. They'll continue to come back until we actually address them, that we actually look at them, be willing to look at them. So we can't get there by just sheer willpower. But there are several things that we can do. So the first thing that we can do is just to notice when the mental objections arise. Just notice it, and they'll be very convincing. They'll say, well, how do I know I can trust this awareness? This is doubt. What, I didn't have the experience that somebody else talked about Therefore, what I have experienced must not be sufficient. Belief, thought. Right? How do I know this will be good for me? How do I know everything will turn out okay? This is fear. So what we can do is not argue with these movements. You can't say to fear, well, I'm just going to ignore you. Because that, first of all, it gives reality to the fear, and it empowers the fear. What we can do is move ahead, so to speak, even in the face of fear, especially in the face of fear, because that's actually what disables fear. It's not we can't address fear by being afraid to look at it, because we may be able to set it aside for a while, but it will raise its head again. What we can do is being willing to face it. Face it not from me as a separate, vulnerable, physical being, but face it from the spaciousness of awareness. The awareness is big enough to include the fear. The awareness isn't afraid of fear. There's nothing in awareness to be harmed. Awareness is that which is capable of noticing whatever arises. Fear, doubt, judgment, blame, regret, all of it. The mind doesn't like to look at those things, doesn't like to really allow those to be seen without judgment, allow those to arise and be willing to remain present for them. Awareness can do that. Awareness is really the only thing that can really do that. As a separate individual self, we can try to do that. That's nice, but it's really aware from the perspective of awareness to be able to remain present for whatever arises without running away, without grasping, without arguing with it, without being afraid of it. It's not that the fear may be there, intense fear may be there, and if so, it will be happening within the spaciousness of awareness. The body may tremble, the mind may be racing, the heart may be beating. All of that, too, is happening within the field of awareness. So this first thing that we can do is just to allow ourselves to remain present for whatever doubts or uncertainties or desires or fears may come up around this movement, life's movement to draw us ever more deeply into itself. Okay, just to remain aware of it. That's what we can do. But we don't want to get caught up into arguing with our own arguments, trying to make them go away, just to see them as mental activity that the mind has been trained to be very good at, very convincing at. It knows all your weak points better than you do. And we can just see, okay, that's the mind. It's going to come up with objections. I may solve one, but there'll be two more after it. if I give weight to those objections, there'll always be more. If I run away from fear, the fear will be larger. If I believe my doubt will persist. What we can do is doubt the doubt, right? Doubt, when the mind has doubts about it, doubt the mind, doubt the capacity of the mind to know what's actually true. Just to see it as mental activity that's useful in one sphere, but not in this sphere. Okay, so that's the first thing that we can do, is just to see any objections that we may have to that transition of our identity to awareness, from personal self to awareness. It's not that we have to kill off the personal self. We just see that, it served a purpose, got us through our teenage years and adulthood to this point. But it's not necessary. It's still there when we need to function in a certain role, but in terms of what we know to be our true identity, it's just not where it is. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing we can do is to spend time in awareness. This is probably obvious. We've talked about it a lot, but it's really valuable. We can recognize awareness, and all too often we want to skip over it to the more exciting parts. Where's the eternal bliss? I've seen awareness. I know what that is. Give me eternal bliss. But awareness is paradoxical in a way, because we can see it wholly. I mean, it's either seen in its entirety or not seen at all, really. And the paradox is, even after it's seen, apparently in its entirety, there's still more to be revealed. That's the paradox. And that just takes time. And the way to do that is just to be willing to be with it, without trying to use it, or without trying to get to the next thing, without taking it for granted, just to really spend time with it, like often throughout the day, not just waiting for, to find, half hour to meditate, but just coming back to it again and again during the day has real value. When Ramana woke up as a teenager, he spent, some years afterwards living in a cave, just assimilating what had been realized, just basically wallowing in awareness, just being with it. Eckhart Tolle also dropped out of Cambridge University and spent a few years on a park bench in London, to the dismay of his classmates after awakening. Some years after that, living in a house with, in a small communal setting, just not doing much, just sort of being in the immensity of the awareness. So some people are really comfortable with that, like, finally, I just don't want to do anything. I just want to, enjoy this release, sense of freedom. Some people are, more of a restless personality, so they see it clearly, and then the ego sort of comes in and wants to do something with it. Well, how could I, how can I change the world? How can I use this? What's next? How can I do something? And so there's that movement. But I'd suggest really giving it some time. If that's your inclination, just really be with it for some time. I mean, maybe you're life situation doesn't permit that, but even if it doesn't, try to take moments out of the day, even 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there, to just be in that spaciousness, because it really allows it to settle. Okay, the third thing that we can do is to begin to do sort of routine things that aren't stressful, things that you commonly do every day, but to do them while maintaining the awareness. So it's one thing to be in awareness when you're sitting, no noise, quiet, meditating. That's good, right? There's also remaining in awareness as awareness and um, doing your daily chores. Maybe it's just walking from the bedroom to the kitchen. Maybe it's waiting for the teapot to boil. Maybe it's walking your dog. Maybe it's brushing your teeth. Maybe it's going for a walk in the park. But to do it in and as awareness. So, I mean, just be that awareness, be that spaciousness, and yet there'll be visual and auditory things happening, the body will be moving, and yet that can all happen. Just sense more and more that sense of it, all of that happening within this awareness that you recognize yourself to be. Right? So that's sort of a little more challenging maybe for most people than just being able to sit in a quiet room and accessing awareness for a short period of time. So this is, again, coming back to it frequently, but to do it when other things are happening. Maybe you're walking in the park and someone else is walking past you and they're talking. And, does the awareness remain for that experience? Okay, so the last thing that's possible to do is to take it again a step further and allow yourselves to function from that awareness in situations that you didn't think you could. Okay, so this might be having a conversation with somebody, especially having a conversation that may be difficult. Maybe going into a meeting without knowing quite what you're going to say. It may be just trusting that there will be a knowingness that comes out of this awareness as appropriate to the situation. It might find that, in a small group of people, something is said that surprises you, that it was just the right thing to be said at a particular moment, an appropriate thing to be said for whatever that situation is. It didn't come out of the past. It wasn't an old story regurgitated. It wasn't coming from any particular agenda. It was just a freshness to it. And, we can, when those kinds of things happen, we can just take note of it as like, oh, not sure where that came from. It didn't come from our thinking mind. It didn't come from our memory, but there was a freshness to it. There can also be a sense of just life sort of nudging us in a particular direction, like, sort of go this way. Gentle, not Charlton Heston, booming voice from the heavens, but just a gentle, doesn't need to be a voice at all or in words at all, but just a movement, like a fresh breeze in spring where you think, oh, maybe maybe I'll call so and so. I haven't talked to them in years. And it turns out that's the right thing to do. It's meaningful for both of you. So when we begin to allow this movement to feel like this awareness isn't just a refuge where we can, find freedom from the world, but we can actually function in the world from that awareness. And so we can just listen to this movement. Sometimes it's called a still small voice, right? Quiet. It's not telling you to do anything. You can still do whatever you want. But you may learn over time that life goes easier if those suggestions are, if we go in that direction, right? But this still small voice, it's not judgmental. It doesn't walk away in a huff if you ignore its suggestion. It doesn't judge you. It doesn't have an agenda. It just says, you might go this way. It doesn't argue. It doesn't justify. If there's pros and cons and arguments, that's all coming from ego. This still small voice is just gentle. It's like, try this. And we're free to ignore it. We may find out over time it's better not to. And in that way, we learn to trust that movement, that innate intelligence of this awareness more and more. And we learn to move more and more from that spaciousness rather than from, old stale opinions and motives and judgments and all of that. So this is actually how what we can do to sort of get through this last bit of hesitancy. Get that little tail through the window. It's just these things, although they feel subtle and maybe not even that important, are sufficient to hold us back. It's sort of like if you were outside and it was a sunny day, you could hold up your hand in front of your face and block out the entire sun. And we do the same with just ideas and opinions and fears and judgments and hopes and all of those things that can cause us to hesitate. Any one of them is sufficient. So we can just feel into when that sense of hesitancy is happening, and look at it. Just say, there it is. It's not bad. It's actually teaching us how to just access that innate capacity that we all have, that intelligence, that heart wisdom that is awareness itself.